restrictions for traveling into the U.S. being tightened, flights between the Caribbean and Canada being suspended, and a vaccine on the way, one can only ask, where does that leave the Bahamas in its fight to keep tourism alive? Welcome to On the Record, and no, it's not Jerome Sawyer, but I'm your special guest host, Jessica Robertson. For almost 1 year now, the Bahamas' #1 tourism industry has been in limbo after a jaw-dropping, record-breaking year the previous year. After welcoming some 7.2 million visitors to our shores in 2019, 2020 came along and made that all a thing of the past. Well, tonight on The Record, we cover the fight to keep tourism alive as we battle one of the greatest effects on the coronavirus in our country. 1 year of little to no tourism in a tourism-dependent country. Don't move, our conversation begins on the other side of this break.
Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory. We take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV Cable Channel 212 and streaming live on Facebook on the R News Bahamas page.
Welcome back to On the Record. I'm your guest host, Jessica Robertson, and tonight we uncover the fight to keep tourism alive. According to data released from the Central Bank of the Bahamas, total visitor arrivals declined by 73% from January to November 2020, which was due in large part to the temporary closures of international borders. Our guest for tonight is here to help us to understand a little better what we're truly up against and how best we can cope during these uncertain times. Help me welcome to On the Record again, Minister of Tourism and Aviation, the Honorable Dionisio D'Aguilar.
Jessica, thank you so much for having me on the Record.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. It's been a full year of little and at some points no tourism happening in the country. What has that uncertainty, the wondering when, if, been like for you and your team?
So 2020 was an incredibly traumatic year for us. We came off 2019 with a record 7.2 million foreign visitors to the country, and we were having an excellent January, February, and even part of March. And then the floor dropped out from under us. And essentially, leisure travel ground almost to a complete halt as we tried to navigate this coronavirus pandemic. And this coronavirus pandemic has really ground tourism to a complete halt. World leaders across the planet telling their citizens, do not travel unless you have to. Do not go anywhere. Stay at home for fear of either transporting or contracting the coronavirus. And this has made it a very, very difficult environment to operate in. As everybody knows, tourism is 50% of our economy. 2 out of every 3 jobs is generated in the Bahamas from tourism. We are one of the most tourism-dependent countries on the planet. And when world leaders telling everyone, do not travel. It has made it an incredibly difficult environment in which to operate. It's been devastating.
And it puts us between a rock and a hard place, because on the one hand we need them, on the other hand we need to protect ourselves as well.
So you're absolutely right. The government has been trying to walk this very fine line. We had a few missteps. We started off the coronavirus pandemic with a total shutdown. So that was it. Nobody in, nobody out, nobody moved. So that brought tourism to a complete standstill. Then we started to ease open a little bit. And then we allowed our visitors, our citizens, to travel and come back without a test if they were traveling under 3 days. And that was found to be problematic. And we saw our second surge in August and September. And until the government could right the ship, we had quarantines and curfews, and nobody wants to travel to a destination that has quarantines and curfews. And so we had to get the situation under control. Thankfully, we figured that out. We seem to be walking that fine line of having in place suitable restrictions to prevent the spread of coronavirus, which has been working quite well for us. But I want to be clear. Any type of restriction is an impediment on travel. And if there are impediments on travel, people don't travel.
Coming off of that record-breaking year 2019 into this, as you call, traumatic 2020, what ground do you think we've lost as a brand, as a destination, if any?
I don't think we have. I just think that our core markets, the United States, from which 83% of our foreign visitors come, and Canada, from which 7%. So from North America, roughly 90% of our foreign visitors originate from North America. And given what they have been going through, given what we see on television every night of the surge in the United States and the total lockdown in Canada, given what's happening in those countries, naturally, that has impacted tourism to the Bahamas. And we have been feeling that impact. But I don't think that has deterred the interest of travelers in North America to come to the Bahamas. And when we get beyond this coronavirus pandemic, I am very convinced that there's a lot of pent-up demand to take a holiday, come out of your house, go lie on a beach, disconnect from this horrible pandemic that everybody's been dealing with, and to recharge and rejuvenate and start life again. So I think that once we get beyond this, and I'm very delighted to see that every day more and more of the vaccine, because that's the light at the end of the tunnel, the vaccine. More and more of the vaccine is getting into the arms of Americans and Canadians. And then hopefully we start giving Bahamians vaccine, as the Prime Minister announced, in the latter part of this month.
We'll definitely come back to talk more vaccines a little later on. But what are we doing in the meantime to remain relevant and that choice destination for those looking to travel? Because again, it's another rock and hard place. Do you spend the money to keep top of mind awareness when people can't move? What do you do as a Ministry of Tourism?
So you're absolutely right. When there is this great amount of uncertainty, when there is all of these restrictions, these impediments to travel, now the United States is requiring their citizens to have a test to re-enter the United States. So that's causing more uncertainty. Canada, of course, is totally locked down to the Caribbean. No flights from the Caribbean up until April the 30th of this year. So for the next 3 months, they're shut down. So in many instances, it doesn't make sense for you to spend your very scarce marketing dollars trying to attract persons to the Bahamas, because there are just too many impediments. And with your world leaders, or with your leaders in your country telling you don't travel, stay at home, it's very hard to combat that. So as after a hurricane, when there's so much negative news in the marketplace, we step back, let some calmness come back to the market. And when we feel that there is interest and there is an ability for people to travel with lower amount of impediments, we will pile back into the market with a very robust marketing campaign. So we're doing as much as we possibly can, inexpensively as possible, using online, social media, those avenues to keep people top of mind. But the more expensive television advertising, billboards, radio advertising, all of the traditional media outlets, we've stepped back from that for the time being.
So no Super Bowl ad this year?
No.
No. So how, you alluded to it, how has that 5-day follow-up antigen test here for the Bahamas been working now? I know we had a bit of a blip at the start. We kind of lost track of some of the people who came in. They weren't getting the test. Is there any consideration to adjusting our protocols to line up with the new U.S. protocols so that maybe visitors only need the one test to satisfy us and them?
So a very good point. Our penetration of the 5-day test, certainly for travelers coming across the border. Of course, November was the very first month that we did this. So we were building capacity, putting in place testing facilities. We've now grown the number of testing facilities to in excess of 80. And in the month of December, 73% of those persons crossing the border got the 5-day antigen test. So that was significantly larger than November. And the number we expect to increase. Why? Because now to re-enter the United States, you need a rapid antigen test. So that is going to fulfill our requirement. Ours, of course, stated that if you were in the country 5 days or more, you would get the rapid antigen test. Now, if you're going back to the United States, no matter how long you're in the Bahamas, you're going to have to get that test. So we expect our compliance percentages to increase even further. And to your question about can you combine a rapid antigen test for the Bahamas with one for the United States? Absolutely. So ours is required on the 5th day, and that the United States requires you to have a rapid antigen test 72 hours before you arrive back in the US. So that will take you to the 8th day. And we will build into our Bahamas Health Visa platform the ability for you to get a visa for your 1st day to your 5th day. So through the 8th day, you should be good to return back to the United States. And that's about 90% of our visitors. Now, there will be people who stay longer, and obviously they will have to go and purchase another test when they are ready or when they want to return back to the United States. So we think that there will be suitable overlap, buy one, get two.
Right. And I imagine for a lot of people, now that the U.S. is requiring it, our requirement doesn't seem quite so draconian or such an impediment.
You're absolutely right. I mean, when we rolled out our Bahamas Health Visa, there was a lot of pushback. And the reason why we brought in that visa was in trying to get people to comply with our PCR test, get a PCR test 5 days before you came here. The airlines said they didn't want to be looking at any PCR tests, but they will look at a visa, but they don't want to look at a PCR test. Now that the Americans have said all the airlines have to look at a PCR test, they've changed their tune. But that's what led to the creation of our health visa. And also understand that our health visa includes mandatory travel insurance for foreign visitors when they come here. And that is, that is transformational. Not many countries offer that. And, God forbid you get here, you test positive, and you need to quarantine here for a while, that the health insurance will give you $500 a day to help you cover those costs. So that is considered a major attracting point to our destination. You're not, as if you're not out on a limb all by yourself. The visa will help you cover those costs when you get into the destination. And that's why we made it mandatory.
Well, that certainly sounds like it's all kind of lining up now. And as I think throughout the year, we've all kind of started to just kind of relax into things, and you realize, okay, well, this is the way it's going to be. And
well, I think when we started, everybody would, everyone was saying, oh, this is going to be a nightmare, and how can you be doing this, and all the rest of it. And really, we were out front over other countries, because other countries have started to do what we've done. They've started to require a test before you arrive. They've required a test after you arrive. And we were just ahead of those countries, the United States, Canada, Europe. So, at the end of the day, while there was resistance, while there was pushback, while everybody said the sky was falling in, while they said that these are, these impediments to travel are really going to cause us to suffer, really that's what every other country has ended up doing. And it's just the new norm. It's just dealing with coronavirus. It is what it is. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is.
There you go. It is what it is. Well, when we come back, we dive even deeper into where we are in the fight to keep tourism alive. Stay with us. We'll be back after this break.
Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook.
Welcome back to On the Record, the fight to keep tourism alive. I'm your host, Jessica Robertson. Earlier this week, Tourism Minister Dionisio D'Aguilar predicted that by the middle to third quarter of the year, the country's tourism sector will begin to improve. While speaking to reporters ahead of this week's cabinet meeting, he further expressed that tourism is getting a lot of body blows, coming off the heels of the recent announcements by Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and U.S. President Joe Biden regarding their new COVID-19 restrictions. Well, my guest tonight to give us a better understanding of what this means for tourism is none other than the Minister of Tourism and Aviation, Dionisio D'Aguilar. So, Minister, thanks. Let's talk about the new restrictions that have been put in place almost immediately by President of the United States, Joe Biden. How has that affected travels as late? And I know it's probably that first speech he gave where he said quarantine and everyone went, what? And they kind of backtracked on that.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. President Joe Biden alluded to the fact that he was contemplating a mandatory federal quarantine for all visitors or all travelers entering the United States. Now, naturally, studies have shown that if a country has a quarantine mechanism in place, that kills tourism, that kills travel. Up to 85% of persons said they will not travel to a country that has quarantine in place. So we were naturally quite fearful of this new requirement. So it was a relief to see that intention was walked back. What I think happened is that the federal government discovered really that this was a strategy that would have to be implemented by the states and local government, and really that wasn't within their remit. And so I think to get a consensus with all the different states and with all the different municipalities in the United States, it would just be too difficult to enforce. So thankfully, that was walked back. What the Americans do have now, of course, is the requirement that you get a rapid antigen test before you return back to the United States within 72 hours. And so that causes some concern for travelers. You know, how do I get the test? What is involved with the test? Will I have it in time? Will I have the paperwork? And so that you have to, really put travelers at ease that this is not a difficult requirement to fulfill. A lot of our hotels do it in-house. It's very easy to access throughout the length and breadth of the Bahamas. And then once they digest this news, once they understand that it's not that difficult to get, once they understand, thank God, in the Bahamas, we made it a requirement after the 5th day to get it. So we ended up rolling out the necessary infrastructure to allow people to get it. Thank God we did that. So it's very easy for us to fulfill that requirement. And then, of course, Prime Minister Trudeau in Canada, and I can't understand why, decided, okay, no trips to and from the Caribbean until April the 30th. We're canceling all flights to and from the Caribbean until April the 30th. Now, my view is that we are very small countries with very small populations with very low amounts of COVID. So we don't represent a risk to the Canadians or the Americans. They represent a far greater risk to us than we to them. So I can't quite understand why he did that, but I think what he wanted to tell his citizenry is, I don't want you all going on vacation, period. I don't want you all traveling for any reason. I know it's cold, I know it's dark, I know it's dreary, I know it's wet in Canada, but I don't want you running off to the Caribbean, going down there and coming back. I don't want anyone to travel. I want people to quarantine, I want people to stay in their homes, I want people to be safe. And that's probably why he did it. But singling out the Caribbean as a place you cannot travel to makes no sense to me when flights from Europe are still coming into Canada and flights from the United States are still coming into Canada. And those countries represent a far greater risk to Canada than the Caribbean could ever do. So I was a little shocked by that. But as you say, another body blow to tourism.
And of course, them doing that cut off probably the only channel from the UK and Europe coming back.
You're absolutely right, because in many ways, the only way to get from Europe to the Bahamas was via a flight through Toronto. I've done it twice myself. So you fly from London into Toronto, you overnight there, and then you come down to Nassau the next day. And that was our only bridge to Europe. And right now we don't have a bridge. You can get to Europe. You can go from here to the US and then to Europe. That's no problem. But when you get to Europe and you have to come back, the United States says that no travelers who have been in Europe in the last 14 days can enter the US. So that's why we went to Canada to come home. So unless you find an alternative route, going through maybe Turks and Caicos or going through Jamaica on a British Airways flight and then working your way back up to Nassau, that's the only way to get home. And even now, with Europe being in such a massive state of lockdown, those flights have been, in essence, canceled. I spoke to the the Minister of Tourism for Jamaica the other day to find out if they had any flights coming in from the UK because of their large diaspora in the UK. And they said, no, there are no flights coming in from the UK. So it's very, very difficult to get to and from Europe using a commercial airline.
Wow. Is there any worry that any other countries in our major markets are going to follow suit with Canada and effectively just block us out?
No, obviously our main concern is the United States. That is the country from whom we receive the largest tranche of travelers. And I think that they are settling down now into their new norm, which is no quarantine, but you need a test to re-enter the United States. And getting over the fear of that, how easy is it to get? What happens if I test positive? All of those concerns. Once getting over that, and people get more comfortable with that, then I think people will look at traveling again. But to be clear, we are a sliver of our former self in terms of travelers coming here. It's probably 5-10% of what it used to be. Of course, we have no cruise passengers, and we don't know when cruising is going to resume. 75% of all foreign visitors coming to the Bahamas came by cruise ship. We were a huge cruise destination. We had, 5.4 million people come here by cruise ship, and they made 7.3 million stops because a lot of them made 1 or 2 stops in the Bahamas. So they created an economic impact, which is not now being felt. So there's body blows all around. This coronavirus pandemic has really impacted the economy of the Bahamas so significantly, blown $1 billion out of our budget, created a far greater number of unemployed. It's just been, tragic.
It has been. How frustrating has it been for you as the Minister of Tourism to watch Mexico, for example, continue to experience pretty good tourism numbers because they didn't have any of the restrictions in place to keep the visitors and their citizenry safe?
So you're absolutely right. Mexico's only requirement for entry was the taking of a temperature on arrival. And we were not prepared to take that risk. Been there, done that, it did not work. If you remember in July, we allowed our citizens to travel to the United States and return without a test if they were staying under 72 hours, and look at the impact that had. So we could not, with good conscience, go down that route. Yes, it worked well for their tourism sector, but we felt minimizing community spread, minimizing deaths and hospitalizations of our people was much more important than attracting foreign visitors to our country. So we made that conscious decision. We put in place requirements, a 5-day PCR test before you came, applying and paying for a visa, getting a rapid antigen test after you have been here greater than 5 days as our mechanism to allow visitors to come here, but not to contribute to community spread. And that has worked in limiting community spread. But you're absolutely right. We have not been as successful as Mexico in terms of attracting foreign visitors because of our impediments to travel. But we felt, as a government, as a country, that that was far more important than allowing persons to come in and allowing Bahamians to go freely to and from the United States and import the coronavirus and lead to community spread. Been there, done that. We're not doing that again.
Not doing that again. Do you think that it's a tough one to bite, what's happening with the U.S. and with Canada in terms of the impact on our immediate tourism, but is it almost a blessing in disguise that they're finally getting things together, and it may be a bit of a longer term blessing and harder to see right now as we're trying to figure out how to feed ourselves, but it's a blessing?
You're absolutely right, and that's a great question because, we're in a dark tunnel right now, and world travel is almost ground to a complete halt. Certainly travel for leisure has almost ground to a complete halt, but there is light at the end of this very dark tunnel, and that is the vaccine. And so every night I turn on my television and I'm watching the American news, and I'm watching them roll out their very robust vaccination program. It had a lot of bumps in the road to begin with, but they're every day ratcheting up the number of people that are getting shots in the arm. So I think the last time I checked, it was 1.5 million a day. I'm sure it'll be in a very short time, it'll be 2 million a day. And every day persons get vaccinated against this coronavirus is a good day for the Bahamas, because the United States was, for all intents and purposes, in meltdown. Record numbers of hospitalizations still, record numbers of deaths still, record number of cases still. And the fact that they were unable to restrict the movement of their population in order to bring the virus under control really presented a fear for us of obviously the import of the coronavirus and these new strains that seem to be making the rounds. So, I was watching the American news last night. I watch it every day, and the number of hospitalizations, the number of deaths, the number of positive cases, they're all beginning to trend downwards as the vaccine gets traction. And that bodes well in the short and long term for the Bahamas, because as they reduce the number of cases in our core market, the United States, that bodes well for the future of tourism in the Bahamas. Must get that under control, and they must get that under control. And of course, we must do what we must do in terms of the vaccine. Obviously, the Prime Minister announced that the vaccine will begin to arrive in country in the latter part of this month. And then the government, of course, will come up with their strategy on how that is rolled out. I'm sure it'll be frontline workers, essential and vulnerable citizens. But I'm hoping and I'm lobbying for tourism workers, hotel workers, to get vaccinated as quickly as possible, so that we can begin to market that our tourism workers have been vaccinated. It's safe to come to the Bahamas, and we can begin to reopen and market our destination in the quickest possible time. And most importantly, to get people back to work, because the impact of this coronavirus on our employment numbers has been devastating. So it's very, very critical in the quickest possible time we're in a position to get people back to work, to attract people to our country, and to begin to rebuild the critical pillar of our economy, which is tourism.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because that was actually one of my questions, was whether or not consideration would be given to making frontline hospitality workers among the first to get this vaccine. That is very contrary to what most places we've seen rolling out the vaccine ahead of us are doing. Everyone, it's the most vulnerable in terms of the elderly and the sick, and then it's healthcare workers, and then it's kind of at some point we'll get to everybody else. But like you said, we need to convince the world and all of these potential travelers who are already vaccinated that it's safe to come here because everyone they interact with will also have been vaccinated. How hard of a sell is that going to be to the Bahamian population, given what we see everyone else doing?
So the Prime Minister has appointed a committee under the auspices of the wonderful Dr. Dal Regis to sort of educate our population about the vaccine and to devise a strategy to roll it out. And, you know, I'm sure, and I'm lobbying, I'm not a part of that committee, but I'm lobbying for tourism workers. So obviously, yes, we need our frontline workers, persons working in hospitals, the police, and all of those persons that interact or need to interact with the general public and therefore expose themselves. Of course, it's the elderly. We're a little different in that, you know, we don't have these old age homes where people in the United States and Canada and in the UK, which have been, you know, real hotbeds of outbreaks. So we don't have those. So I'm not sure how they're going to deal with that. But in my capacity as the Minister of Tourism, I'm lobbying for tourism workers. And I'm lobbying for them because they are such a critical component of our economy. Now, I don't know how that's going to pan out. I don't know what their strategy is. It's just me and my very selfish view, trying to get our economy up and running. But I think it makes sense. And I think that as many of our tourism workers that we can get back to work as quickly as possible and to be able to inform the traveling public from our core countries like the United States, Canada, and the UK that our tourism workers have been vaccinated will bode well for the future of tourism in the Bahamas. So I'm sure the government will have to take into consideration a whole heck of a lot of things in order to come to who will get it first and how it will be rolled out. But I will continue to lobby for tourism workers to get them back to work and employed and, you know, living again with income and dignity.
Do you see the Bahamas coming to a point somewhere in the near to medium future where we're going to require proof of vaccination of visitors?
So this is a very interesting point. You know, I spoke to the health professionals and I said, look, because people are asking us, if I have the vaccine, do I need to take a PCR test to come to the Bahamas? Do I have to fulfill your health requirements? I've been vaccinated against this coronavirus pandemic. And I think at some stage we will get to that. But right now, the health professionals tell me that even though you take the vaccine, all the vaccine does is suppress the symptoms. You can still get infected. You can still become infectious, i.e. you're spreading the virus amongst the people around you. So until a greater body of people have been vaccinated, I think we're still going to require you to get a PCR test and apply for a visa to come to the Bahamas. Because if you're vaccinated and I'm not, you can still spread it to me because you can still get infected and you can still get infectious. So I think it will get there. And, you know, how do people prove that they've had the vaccine? I'm hoping that the Americans are and other nations are giving people documentation that they've been vaccinated. You know, you see on television people, all these drive-throughs, and I'm not sure how that is being disseminated to them that they've had the vaccine and how they're keeping track of that. But it will be important if you're intending to undergo international travel to demonstrate, I'm sure, to the countries to which you're traveling to, the Bahamas, that you have had the vaccine. Now, there will be a tranche of people that will, for philosophical reasons or religious reasons or whatever reasons, will decide that they're not going to take the vaccine. We're going to encourage as many people that can to do so. And whether we make that a requirement for entry is still to be decided. And even if you get the vaccine, do you have to fulfill the requirements of getting a PCR test and then doing the rapid antigen test? Will those requirements still remain in place? I think for the short term, yes, until as many people as possible become vaccinated. But once we get a certain percentage of our population and their population vaccinated, I think that we'll probably begin to release that requirement. Now, you know, I'm the Minister of Tourism. I'm not the health man. I don't have any knowledge of the science, but this is just what I think.
Absolutely. Lots of unknowns still, but at least it does feel like we're headed finally in the right.
Light at the end of the tunnel.
You know, it's one of those things, it seems almost unfair that we've been doing all that we've been doing and doing the right thing, and because others haven't, we're still in this predicament.
You're absolutely right. I mean, if the whole world had at the same time back in March decided to lock down, then I think we would have been in a far better place. But we locked down, and our largest source market of visitors did not. And so they experienced unprecedented levels of community spread, which really frightens us. I mean, there's a giant of a country, 330 million persons to our north, from which we derive 85% of our foreign visitors, and we're a small country of just under 400,000. So we were naturally quite frightened about the potential of them bringing community spread here. So I think that we had to do what we had to do. I think we had to implement the restrictions that we have. And by and large, it has been working. We have far lower numbers of persons in hospitals today than we did back in September. Every day I check, it's probably 15, 16 right now. Been a little uptick of late, but it's still a relatively low number. And every day, the number of people testing positive is relatively low. So our strategy has been working. We've sort of walked that fine line of allowing some visitors in, but limiting the amount of the community spread. And the Bahamian people have been fabulous in terms of abiding by the rules. I think we're probably getting a little loosey-goosey right now because there just isn't that many cases around. And so when we don't hear that much about it, we start to relax and maybe not wear our mask as much or wash our hands as much. But it's absolutely critically important that we continue to do that because we don't want to have our third surge. So until the vaccine is here and can begin to gain some traction, we have to remain as vigilant as we possibly can, because if we're putting in all these restrictions and we still get bad COVID numbers, that's not going to bode well on the destination. We have very successfully managed to get our rating by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in the United States, from a level 4, which is don't even think of going there, to level 3, which is now travel with caution. But you know, all world leaders are telling their citizens, if you don't have to travel, don't travel. And a lot of persons, rather than taking the risk of going overseas, are probably deciding that if they are going to go on a vacation, they're probably just going to remain relatively close to home and certainly within country.
Absolutely. Well, don't go anywhere. More On the Record coming up. The fight to keep tourism alive after this break.
Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits. Venture into unknown territory. We take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV Cable Channel 212 and streaming live on Facebook on the R News Bahamas page.
You're watching On the Record. Thank you for staying with us for our final segment. I'm your host, Jessica Robertson, and tonight we're discussing the fight to keep tourism alive with Minister of Tourism and Aviation, Dionisio D'Aguilar. Minister, we talked a lot about what's happening with trying to get international tourists in and all the impediments that other countries are throwing up that are making it harder and harder, it seems, by the day. Where are we now as it relates, though, to domestic tourism?
So, you know, the government once again is facing a conundrum. Just as world leaders are telling our citizenry or telling their citizenry not to travel, so too are we telling our citizenry as much as possible, don't travel unless you have to. So we're an archipelagic country. We're a country of many islands. Generally, our hotspots for coronavirus have been our two major population centers, Nassau and Freeport, or Grand Bahama and New Providence. So the government has really tried to limit the amount of travel from those two islands to the outer islands. Now, this has been very frustrating to Bahamians. It's very, very frustrating not to be able to go to a family island when you want to, and also the costs associated with travel there. You have to get a PCR test, you have to get a visa. All of this adds to the costs of the travel. But what the government is trying to say is, look, if you don't have to travel to a family island, please don't. Why? Because we want to limit the possibility of community spread in those islands. Think of those islands. They're very small communities. They have very limited health facilities, and we don't want anyone in those communities to contract the virus and have a less than ideal outcome. And if they have to be airlifted to Nassau in order to receive the required healthcare, it's very expensive, very time consuming, and are we going to get you up here in time? So we are trying to prevent rather than having to react. And it's annoying. It's costly for persons to move around, but we understand that, but understand what our intention is, to really limit the amount of travel to a family island, to thereby prevent the possibility of community spread in those islands.
Do you see, what is your barometer for saying, you know what, we can ease up on this? Is there a magic number that you're looking for?
So it is, I mean, obviously this is not my call. This is the call of the health professionals, and I'm sure they're receiving enormous pressure to reconsider these travel restrictions every day. I'm certainly am. And I think that, they're fearful because if you ease up and then there's an outbreak, then the easing up will be blamed for the outbreak. So, it is a difficult situation. We think that, in the next, as the vaccine begins to get traction, probably as the government may decide, we're going to start with the family islands in order to understanding that there are limited healthcare facilities there. Let's vaccinate our citizens who have the most limited access to healthcare and use that as a priority. So I'm sure they're trying to, as best as possible, devise a strategy that will ultimately protect the family islanders from the spread of the coronavirus, but allow for travel from our main population centers to those islands. So how we roll out our vaccination strategy will probably determine when the easing occurs as it relates to travel to those islands. Now, as the Minister of Tourism, there's international tourism and there's domestic tourism. And so obviously, these impediments to travel, these visas, these additional costs are very frustrating to the Minister of Tourism. But I understand the strategy of the government, which is to prevent the spread into these vulnerable family islands. I understand that and I get that. And how they roll out their vaccination strategy will probably determine when the relaxation of travel from our population centers, Nassau and Freeport, will be eased to our family of islands.
It's a tough one because, boy, it's frustrating as a citizen when it seems easier for someone from the U.S. to get to the family islands and experience them than it is for us.
Well, what we've done actually is we've tried to mirror the policy. So if you're coming from Florida and you're going to Abaco, well, you have to get a PCR test 5 days before you come. You have to apply for a visa. If you're staying under 4 days, you pay $40. If you're staying greater than 4 days, you spend $60. So if you're going from Nassau to Abaco, you have to get a PCR test. You have to apply for a visa, which is $25, just to cover the cost of your 5-day antigen test. So we're trying to standardize and make it the same. So if you're coming from overseas and you're going to one of our vulnerable family islands, this is the requirements. And if you're coming from Nassau and you're coming from Freeport, those requirements are essentially the same. So we don't think that there's any disparity in the requirements. They're the same. We're just identifying New Providence and Grand Bahama as the potential source of the spread, and also foreign visitors coming in as a potential source. And we're applying the same rules to both.
I think many of us watching the show, the focus has been very much on tends to be very much on New Providence and Grand Bahama. What are you hearing from the tourism stakeholders in these other islands, the more remote islands? Because some islands, they've actually been doing okay, especially with the yachting visitors.
So you're absolutely right. The strata of the tourism sector that deals with the high-end travelers has been doing remarkably well. So I remember over Christmas, I was at one particular smaller hotel in New Providence, and they said that they had a better Christmas this year than they did last year. They didn't make as much on food and beverage because they didn't have as many parties and social events, but certainly on the hotel component, they did better this year than last year. You see, world travelers are looking for secure, secluded places to visit. And the family islands are naturally set up for that. They are secluded, they are low density, they are boutique in nature, that personalized service, not crowds, not that many people. So travelers, discerning travelers who want to make a safe holiday are looking for just such destinations. Now, don't get me wrong, everybody's experienced a downturn. But I know that in speaking to a particular hotel owner in Harbor Island, he told me that it's working great for him. These travel policies are working very good for him. People are feeling safe when they come here. I had the opportunity to speak to a number of travelers over the Christmas, and they're saying, look, they feel safe. They don't mind getting the PCR test. They don't mind our entry protocols. They're fairly straightforward. They're easy to navigate online. It's all done online now, so it's working quite well. And the 5-day rapid antigen test makes them feel safe. So in those particular instances, that high-end market has been doing very well. The yachts, the private jets, the boutique hotels. Right. But the core of our business and the large employment generator. I mean, if I'm a constituent of Freetown, I'm looking for a job, and most of the jobs are generated in our larger properties. And so in that particular market, which have a lot of room nights to fill every night, require mass travel, that is the most impacted component of our tourism sector. And that is the largest income generator and the largest job generator for our tourism. So it's absolutely critical that we get that segment of the market up and running as quickly as possible, which I see happening once vaccination gets traction. But right now, that one is being probably impacted the most.
In terms of making people feel safe, I know that the Bahamas has signed on to the World Travel and Tourism Council's Safe Travels stamp and seal of approval, and I know that we've started to roll this out slowly. I know from personal experience that some properties have already been inspected and are starting to get this. How important is it for the Bahamas to sign on to something that's at this global level, and will this replace any, I think, the Green and Pristine or any local program that we were at some point thinking about doing?
So you're absolutely right. I mean, the discerning travelers do research before they come. How is your CDC rating? What are the travel advisories against your country? What are your strategies for navigating the coronavirus pandemic? What are you doing to ensure that when I come to your destination, I'm going to have a safe and COVID-free experience? And so any strategies that we deploy that can demonstrate and put the visitor at ease that they're going to be safe, not only from a crime standpoint, but from a health standpoint when they come to the Bahamas, is extremely important. And I think that, coronavirus and the pandemic has probably changed tourism, probably changed our lives for the next 20 years. We'll be talking about this for as long as I'm alive and probably for as long as anyone can remember. And we're going to have to demonstrate now to visitors that we have taken the necessary strategy, deployed the necessary strategies, implemented the necessary protocols to not only bring about a safe outcome from a safety, crime perspective, but from a health perspective. And whatever strategies we can do, whatever international programs that we can sign on to give the visitor the assurance that they're going to have a safe holiday will be to our advantage.
Absolutely. Do you see making these kinds of stamps and seals a requirement for tourism-based
Well,
ventures?
the market will determine it. I'm sure that every hotel after this pandemic is somewhat subsided will want to demonstrate through their marketing programs that they have this seal of approval and that seal of approval, and they fulfilled the requirements for this and they fulfilled the requirements for that. I think it'll be important to demonstrate to the potential traveler that they have taken those necessary steps to assure the traveler that don't worry, when you come here, COVID-19 is not a problem for you. I mean, I think COVID-19 is going to be with us for a while. I mean, yes, you'll have vaccines, but as we've seen, there's mutations and new strains that are coming out almost seemingly every day. So I think that until we settle down and get a handle on this and bring the spread of this very annoying virus under control, I think everybody is going to have to still be on their guards, wear their masks, socially distance, wash their hands, so on and so forth, in order to ensure that they don't contract whatever strain of virus is the order of the day. So I think, we would be deluding ourselves to think that this is going to be over and done with in the shortest possible time. I'm sure some derivation of the current coronavirus will be among us for quite some time to come, and we'll have to adjust accordingly, and therefore demonstrating to visitors, assuring visitors that you have this matter in hand when they come to your destination will be very important to us.
And it's important to us for our safety that we attract people, tourists, who are concerned about it.
So, I haven't mentioned this, but our primary focus of the government is to protect our citizens. That's our primary mandate. So while, yes, whether I get a job or my employment opportunities are important, a government's first and primary role is to protect you against sickness. And that has really been our driving mandate. So as we determine what are the travel criteria for persons to come into the Bahamas, we have in mind, front of mind, how am I going to protect my citizens from these travelers? What are going to be our entry protocols? What are going to be our requirements to come here? And yes, we want to protect them from getting infected from us, but most importantly, we want to protect us from getting infected from them. And if travelers consider the protocols that you deploy at your properties as a condition of travel, I think we'll end up attracting visitors who have safety front of mind, which are the most important ones to come to our country.
Absolutely. Now, I know we have not left enough time for this topic. We've only got about 5 minutes left, but cruise ships. We alluded to it earlier. Without cruise travel, and that was such a huge, huge bulk of our product, without that, can we rebound?
So let's give some stats. So Nassau welcomed 3.6 million foreign visitors into Nassau. Across the country, there were 5.4 million visitors that came here by cruise, and they made a total of 7.2 million stops. So as you can see, the sheer volume of cruise passengers and their economic impact on the economy of the Bahamas and the employment that they created for Bahamians was huge. So with the complete dead stop of the cruise industry, that has been incredibly impactful. You see it everywhere. Bay Street is deserted, straw markets are closed, taxi cab drivers are operating at very reduced levels. Hair braiders have nothing to do. It has been significantly impactful. Now, this is nothing that we can control. This is in the hands of the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, and they are negotiating back and forth with cruise ships on how they can recommence travel. What are going to be the protocols by which someone can take a cruise? And we, as a major cruise destination, have to come to terms with, even when they start traveling, there is a possibility of an outbreak on a cruise. And we can't, say, persons can't dock to possibly fly back home, we have to understand how important this industry is to our country, and we have to work with how it's going to be transformed and developed. So I don't know when it's going to start. It seems that every time they set a date, there's always a delay. But I've been in constant negotiations constant discussions with the cruise companies, preparing for the day that they can sail and return back to the Bahamas. And I've said this on a number of occasions. They'll probably start off with trips to their private islands to work out all the kinks in their travel protocols. Then they'll move to our population centers and go on prearranged excursions. And then the final step will be to take that stroll down Bay Street and to begin to impact as many persons as they can. I know there will be a huge desire for, as soon as the first cruise ship comes, that everybody descends on them and tries to get them to visit their business. But it's going to be very much a controlled process, because the cruise company is going to be very, very, very concerned that none of their passengers get infected and they have an outbreak on the ship. Because I don't know what it is about that, but anytime there's an outbreak on a cruise ship, that is world news, that goes viral. So they have to be super careful and super cautious to ensure that, as best as possible, they minimize the possibility of an outbreak. But I'm convinced it's going to happen. It's got to happen every so often, but we just have to be mature on how we deal with it and how we allow them to disembark their sick passengers but not infect our citizens. And we need to understand those protocols, but allow for it to happen so that the cruise ship can continue, but those sick passengers can come off, get on a medical flight, and be evacuated back to their hometown.
So again, it comes back to, we've just got to keep doing everything that we've been doing to keep us as a safe destination, as one that is, really just.
The beautiful thing about cruising is that when it starts, the Bahamas is the first stop. The three busiest cruise ports in the world are Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Cape Canaveral. You push out of them and you fall into the Bahamas. And while many, many years ago, we would have thought these private islands were, a giveaway, or really not creating sufficient impact, or why are we doing these private islands? Really now, they are the hook for the cruise companies. They've invested $100, $200, $300 million in these private islands. And so they are interested in coming back to them. And they create employment opportunities for Bahamians. Some may say they should create more, but that's the hook to bring them into the Bahamas. And of course, if they bring their passengers to those private islands, we're naturally going to encourage them to come to our population centers, because that is where they will create the greatest impact for our people. But we understand that there's a phase while they work out their kinks to get up and running, and then they'll come to our population centers. But I can assure the Bahamian people, assure the constituents of Freetown, that when cruising starts, the Bahamas is going to be the first stop.
Sounds good to me. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of On the Record, the fight to keep tourism alive. It's been my pleasure hosting for you. On behalf of executive producer Jerome Sawyer, special thanks to tonight's guest, the Honorable Dionisio D'Aguilar, for joining us, my technical team, and of course to you, our viewers. This could never be done without all of you. We'll see you again next week, same time, same place, On the Record.
Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook.